I wonder if you've ever built anything. When we had our boys, when they were little, and they got to the age where they were into Lego, I think Steve enjoyed it more than they did at times, because really all they wanted to do was just build it out of anything, really. And Steve was insistent that you followed the instructions. He doesn't follow instructions for IKEA furniture or anything else, but when it came to Lego, he seemed to have the ability to follow the instructions long and hard. Building's a funny thing, isn't it? Some of you might know that we've just opened a cattery. And where we've built our cattery, there was another building in its place, albeit made out of wood and albeit built on stilts on the bank hillside. And albeit when you walked in it, very wobbly and wonky, and in places you could see right through to the ground underneath. And there was a period of time when we thought maybe we can repurpose this wonky, leaking, wobbly, straight through the floor building to make it something that is worthy of what we want to do with it. Yesterday, and the answer to that was, of course, no. We knocked it down and we laid some proper foundations. That was an experience in itself. Yesterday, we were out in the car with my father-in-law, who's staying with me, and he used to live in the kind of Bocking Lane kind of area of Sheffield 8. And as we were driving around in the car, he said, "What's happening here? Look at all this scaffolding. What's happening? There's something missing," he said. He could see there was something missing on the road, even though he'd not travelled on that road for a long time. Steve said, "Oh, it's they're building a house. They've knocked down one of the bungalows. It wasn't fit for purpose anymore. They've knocked it down." I wonder whether our lives are fit for purpose, because God calls each and every one of us. God called the Queen for a life of service, a big task for anybody to take on. And in our reading from the Old Testament, King Cyrus was called by God. Now, what you have to remember is the Israelites had all been exiled to Babylon. They were in a period where actually they'd not listened to God and things had gone terribly wrong. And so they'd been exiled. They'd been away from their own country. They're coming home. And they had been pushed out and separated. And yet King Cyrus gets a revelation and he issues a decree to rebuild the temple. If you've been following the series and you've been reading Ezra like I have, you'll know that just before our reading today, there's opposition to the rebuilding. Again, back to our cattery, we had to put a little sign on the gate to say this is what we were planning to do, planning permission regulations and all of that. And tentatively we said, oh gosh, we hope that nobody opposes our plans. I wonder whether the legacy that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth has left, whether people will oppose that legacy, or whether we will stand strong and stand firm in the foundations that she's laid for this country. Solid foundations, strong work ethic, justice and fairness. But people do oppose. People do oppose. Everybody has a different view, or it seems to be in today's world. And people face difficulties, and the Queen herself was somebody who, as we know through the media, throughout her life, faced many difficulties. After all, she is only like us. None of us are above difficulties, and none of us, might I say, are above opposition. But the Queen's faith in God was strong. It's that faith in God that we would want to hold on to. And the Israelites, despite being exiled, despite being distant from God, they were still God's people. And so here is King Cyrus making a decree. By the Old Testament, I didn't used to like my Old Testament a while ago, well, years ago. And then I really got into it. And it's a fascinating book. A bit confusing at times, I must admit, but fascinating. And kings come and kings go. And there's this like ebb and flow. Good king, bad king, good king, bad king. Bit like Steve playing with the boys. Good cop, bad cop, good cop, bad cop. And there's this decree by King Cyrus to rebuild the temple, give back all the gold and the silver and all the things that have been stolen out of the original temple and give it back. And then, of course, Cyrus disappears, and there's this ebb and flow of kings, and eventually the work stops. The work just stops. But people are not happy that the work has stopped. And so they begin to look in the scrolls. Wouldn't you just love to find these scrolls? I think in some ancient scrolls have been found. But they look back in the scrolls to see who really said that this temple could be built. King Darius then issued an order, and they searched in the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon. Now that's fascinating. Babylon, the place of exile, is the place that God saves something sacred to be found so the temple can be rebuilt. And that's where the scroll is found. In the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem. There, in a place of exile, God had stored up something sacred. I wonder where God has stored up what we should have as sacred. I would say that God has stored up in heaven that's sacred for us. But he's laid foundation stones here on earth. And Jesus was called the cornerstone, the foundation stone. Our cattery is nice and solid and firm, seems to be surviving hot weather, windy weather, rainy weather. We've got the cold weather to come yet, but so far so good. Because the foundation is good. If the foundation is good, the rest is relatively easy. Earlier in our Peter reading, we hear these words, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone. The one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." Jesus, the cornerstone, has been laid. And if we build our lives on him, then we'll never ever be put to shame. That's a good legacy. I heard one or two people say in various places since the Queen had passed away, I wonder what legacy she's left. I wonder what legacy she's left. And I was interested with those words because recently you may know that I've left Valley Kids, the Christian charity that I'd worked for 17 years. And it's been an amazing journey and adventure, sharing with thousands, literally, boys and girls across Derbyshire, the good news about Jesus. And in my last week, as I was leaving Valley Kids, I was saying to God as I was driving around, what legacy have I left? Have I left a legacy? Well, I wonder what legacy I have left. And I happened to go into the range near Alfreton, her shop, just to buy some bits. And there was a young lady behind the counter. I stood in a queue to pay for my things. And as I got to the counter, and she looked at me, she said, I think I know you, don't I? I said, I don't know, maybe. And the thing is, when you work in lots of schools, over 80 schools, everybody seems to think they know you, but you haven't a clue who they are. So you just smile and nod most of the time. She said, you're that lady that used to come and do school assemblies, aren't you? You're that lady who told us about, she started to reel off about half a dozen Bible stories. I said, do you go to church? She said, no. She said, I last saw you when I was 8. And she was in her early 20s. And I came out of the shop and I just felt a whisper from God. And it said, you've left a legacy. I wonder what the Queen has left. Because I think she's left a foundation that we shouldn't oppose, a foundation that we shouldn't reject, but a foundation we should be grateful for and a foundation we should build upon. 1 Peter 2, verse 9 and 10, which we heard. You are a chosen people. That's you. Just have a look at somebody. They're a chosen people. You guys here, me, we're a chosen people. A royal priesthood. I used to say to boys and girls, do you know I'm a princess? They were like, really? You don't look like a princess. One of them once said to me, where's your crown? Princesses wear crowns. So it's a very special one. It's invisible. We're part of a royal family. That's fantastic. We're a holy nation. Holy, clean, right. Not because of what we've done, but because of what Jesus did for us. A holy nation. God's special possession. So special that he's captured and he's stored up something for us in heaven. Salvation. And we're God's special possession so that we may declare the praises of him who called us out of darkness into his wonderful light. That wonderful song, isn't there? My chains fell off, my heart was free. And I think you'd agree with me that when you see images of Queen Elizabeth II, she had that countenance that was more than just regal. She had that countenance, that light travelling with her and in her. I wonder whether people that we meet can see that light that travels with us and in us. Once we were not people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. God is kind and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love. Let's pray.